like you were born to give?
I was born as someone who liked to give, who wished to take care of the world.
How did you see that happening as you were growing up? What did you do?
I was just, my family was always very involved in the community, whether it be the one they lived in or worked in, and it was just part of who we were.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't see it as anything special.
What did you do? What do you remember doing when you were younger, when you were a teenager? What kinds of things were you involved in?
Well, having gone to a Quaker boarding school, service is part of is part of their belief system, and my mother started the Honeybrook Library. My parents owned sports shops in Bryn Mawr and Paoli, and made the areas where they worked became part of the community, and raised money for local charities by painting the windows in Bryn Mawr for Halloween, and having people make them into competitions, and trying to raise awareness and money for local youth. My father always taught local youth. It just was part of, Bob and I talked about it earlier, that I think that every child probably first learned about giving with their Halloween box for United Way.
United Way and UNICEF.
And
UNICEF. When I
UNICEF.
was a kid. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, it was probably UNICEF instead of United Way. The little orange and black boxes.
It was UNICEF.
It was UNICEF.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But they don't do that anymore.
No, I think because our society has changed, and people worry about sending their children out without the supervision, and I don't think that it's accepted. They're afraid of what might come of it. I don't think that they instill it the same way.
All right, so you really saw it as a way to live and breathe from the
Yes.
day that you really started to realize that there was a world out there, and the family got involved all over the place. And that continued through school. Tell me about some of the things through school. You said the Quaker school.
In a Quaker environment, service is part of your daily life. So we all volunteered. You volunteer within the school. I volunteered at a daycare and a preschool through my junior and senior year. To some extent, it's a way to learn what you love. In another, it's I believe to help you learn how much blessing you have and how much blessing you can bestow on others.
What were some of the things that you remember struck you early on when you were doing service projects and volunteering, especially in school? Were there things that you remember that just were sort of aha moments, or you said it's a way to look at the blessings you have and realize that? Do you remember anything in particular?
That we were supposed to start with Bob?
You started early.
No, I was saying why I didn't think that it was necessarily inspirational.
I think it's pretty inspirational. You just don't realize it's such because it's the way you live and breathe. So, yeah.
You know, I would have long talks with Mom and Dad about the differences in the way that we grew up, and that we didn't have to make the choices that between feeding or heating our home or a good education. So it wasn't necessarily aha moments. It was long time conversations just on the fact that we were blessed. We were no better than anyone. We were blessed, though.
So they were deep conversations where you're really trying to put some understanding and meaning around it, and you started resonating with people's needs, and feeling fortunate that you didn't have to make those same choices.
When I was 15, I was asked to go to Japan with my roommate, and I assumed that wouldn't be possible, and called home and said that I had this invitation, and Mom and Dad took a second mortgage on the house to make sure that I could go, and said you should never miss a chance that you can travel, that you can learn what other people in the world have to deal with. And I remember being so struck in Hong Kong by the smallest children. The first thing that they would say is $1 Hong Kong dollar, because they didn't know anything except to try to better themselves by getting money from tours. And in Thailand, the very young children who had things around their necks, and they would swim in the klongs in the dirtiest of water and come up by the boats to try to sell their wares. So I think I was struck from a very early age that there was work to do everywhere. And sometimes I feel that I'm very happy trying to save the world one person at a time. Sometimes I feel that we need a program that is going to affect hundreds to thousands, but that is definitely not consistent in my mind. On any given day, it can be that one person at a time is fine, or it can be, yes.
So at the same time, changing the system.
Exactly.
Would do it as well. Huh.
Yeah.
My goodness, I have no idea. Yeah, that's so striking. Shall we? We've kind of worked up until you hadn't met by the time you were 15, so why don't we kind of go over to you, sir? What do you remember from early days, family life?
Early days, looking at little experiences that probably end up influencing you throughout your life. At Halloween, to me, it was more important to do UNICEF than it was to get candy. And the ads were compelling, and you felt that you were helping these people. And so, to me, it was fun to go out and ask for money and not worry about necessarily getting the candy, but knowing you were helping these people. And the different ways that our generation were influenced were, I thought, good for all people. I mean, you couldn't check out your groceries without seeing a March of Dimes. And, you're always there going, come on, Mom, let's put in, and try to fill up the display and stuff like that. So, there seems to be a going away from that. And, throughout different things and experiences, there were always, the cups at the smaller stores for, whether it's a dog, a person, or a cause that you'd put your change in. And you don't quite see that as much as you used to. And so I think giving was something that was natural as a child.
I guess it's more into adding some extra money on your credit card bill when you're checking out of the grocery store, or making a donation online by texting. so you don't see the physicality of it in front of you these days. That may be part of it.
You don't see much of that. I look at Wegmans, and they have checkout for hunger. And they're very good about it, and when the lady's checking you out through the groceries, she'll be saying, would you like to, donate something towards hunger? And they raise a good amount of money. So, it is there, but it just doesn't seem as prevalent as it used to.
What do you remember about, that's one example of, sort of the charity, change for charity sort of thing. Are there other things you remember growing up just about what was going on maybe in the world or in your family, and what got you involved? Did you volunteer? Did you do any kind of family things? Did you go to events?
Well,
Boy Scouts?
my parents were very, very active, and more in the historical and the cultural aspects of Wilmington and Philadelphia. And so constantly, there was talk about it, or you see them getting dressed up for the events and this and that. And that seemed to be one side of it, but I was also raised by two people, and they gave 10% of everything they made to the church. And it was something they didn't talk about all the time, but you'd be sitting there thinking at Christmas time, now if you get a bonus, you're going to give 10% of that too. And so we would talk about it, and they did. Anytime they got anything, even a small gratitude from a guest or something like that, they would give 10% to their church. So, I guess I was sort of brought up seeing, one, what the wealthy do, and two, what the poor do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, change for charity on both sides. The tithing, the bonuses, as well as what goes on at the counters at the stores and things. Can you back up a little bit? I forgot to ask you, remember the other day when I emailed you, was it your father or your grandfather, your uncle? Would you mind telling a little bit of the story about sort of the family's involvement overall with Tylenol and that lovely stuff? What do you remember about it as a kid?
What I remember from childhood, some of it, the FDA would not be happy with it.
Oh, we'll cut that part out.
You used to be able to walk along and put your hands out and have all the pills running through them and everything else. But no, it was my great-grandfather that was basically a pharmacist. And my grandfather picked up on the business and started to do research and looking for different products and putting their name on it and stuff like that. And my uncle and my father both came up with Tylenol and went to my grandfather and said, we have a product that we think will take on Bayer aspirin. And my grandfather was a very open person, but he thought that these two sons of his were a little too ambitious in their thoughts, but he didn't stifle it. So they came up and developed Tylenol. They were smart enough not to try to just go out and sell it. They went to the hospitals and the doctors for a 3 to 4 year period, and their whole budget of marketing and advertising and everything else was giving out samples. So Bayer was sort of sitting back, not aware of what was going on, and then they exploded with their advertising program, saying 3 out of 4 doctors and hospitals use Tylenol for headaches, and with the less chance of an upset stomach, and from there it took off.
Now, when you were a child, you went from different sort of places and how busy they were and what they were involved in, and it sounds like they were incredibly busy. So they were businessmen, marketing, like all over the place. Do you remember any of that influence as a child?
I was the youngest of 4, and so they weren't around a lot when I was growing up, and that's why the other 2 people were so influential on, me and my growing up. And at 14, I went off to boarding school. But in those days, the wife would travel with the husband on business. So they weren't around a lot.
And then things really must have changed, but you were in boarding school by then, yes?
Things didn't change that much. They stayed that busy, and I was in boarding school with all the other athletics and different things that boarding school keeps you occupied with.
And how did you meet this young lady?
Blind date.
Are you serious? Was it really? No, come on. How did you two meet?
We were fixed up by a man who was on my parents' board, and he was at that time president of Bob's company, Hoppies. And so he had known me. I babysat for his children when I was very young. He'd known me since I was probably 9 or 10. And he and his wife just got it in mind that either we were meant for each other or that I would be good for Bob. I'm not sure which. And worked literally for, I would say, 2 years to have us meet. I was living in Spokane, Washington, and so they had me work a party that they were giving so that I would meet Bob. And I went back to Spokane, came back 2 years later, and we were engaged 3 months after our first date.
3 months after your first date. So they were right and took full credit for it.
It didn't take long for us to make up our mind.
So we met once at 2 years before we had our first date, and then.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So then, I mean, you get together, you create a life together, you're starting to raise a family. How are you trying to get involved in the community together? I mean, how did that sort of work as you were newlyweds? How were you able to get involved in the community?
I think it was neat that our interests paralleled each other. And Jennifer had gotten her master's degree and was focused on the importance of nutrition. And, we both had a small giving program at the time. We had a family foundation where we could dictate where some of that money went to. We could also hopefully control or at least help them to go into areas that were of interest to us. So I think it was sort of like a team effort, and we both very much agreed on our central focus of interest.
And we both agreed on volunteering, and I mean, in graduate school, I volunteered when we first were married and I was pregnant with Tyler. I volunteered at the Association for the Blind. I don't know how, and on the board of the Coatesville Visiting Nurses. It just was part of who we are.
And it's unusual, actually, that you're doing this as a team. So many times it's either the husband or the wife. So the fact that you've found ways to do this together does make you very wonderfully unusual, too. But you have interests in common. Talk a little bit about what you're most interested in. You started to say nutrition and visiting nurses. What sorts of things do you care about individually and together?
We care about youth. We care about feeding people nutritious food, having people healthy. Some of that comes from Clennial Foundation, from your upbringing, health and human services.
But we look at the essentials, and while art and culture are good and helpful, we don't put money into that because we think that our money is more influential if we go after education, hunger, shelter, what is really essential to make people have better lives. And we also both go to site visits, and we want to understand where our money's going. We want to see their financials. We want to better understand what they're doing. And so it's of interest to both of us. I mean, right now we're looking at 2 different organizations that want to have a meeting. Well, the meeting's with both of us. And so it's a team effort, but very rarely do we go in a different direction. We just complement each other, and it works out fantastically. Jennifer's just joined another board, and I'm staying on at the food bank, so pretty soon we're going to have a tug of war over the giving. But no, it's enjoyable. Everything I've done over the years, I've always felt that I couldn't have done it without her helping behind the scenes. And if I'm doing a campaign, she's tolerant of all the calls, all the interruptions. Some of them were before the cell phones, so this was the house phone that was getting the calls and the interruptions and the dinner calls and everything else. And so, there's that thing behind every good person is someone else, and I think that's why we've been good, because we've both helped each other.
Yeah, tremendously. Can you talk about a few of the causes that you've been involved in, and sort of what compels you to get involved with them? How did you sort of select them? Did they come to you? Did you go to them? Did you find them? What made you jump in more, not less, that sort of thing?
They came to me. I had a general rule that I wouldn't do more than 4 years. And I felt if I couldn't have an impact in 4 years, then I wasn't going to have an impact in 8 years or 10 years. So I usually will go to an organization. I try to stay with one at a time, because if I get involved, I'm involved. I mean, I'm going to have my hands in things. I'm going to be there on site. I'm going to be on committees. So they get a lot of time and a lot of effort. I've been with organizations that might have a national chapter or a national organization, and when you try to change the local organization, you find you're restricted. And so 2 different times I've been with national organizations and been with a local chapter, and just felt that you're not going to be able to change. I like organizations that address what is really going to change, and not do the Band-Aid thing where you do something every year and you give money to them, but you don't see them changing what is the root of the problem. So it's rewarding when you know that you can change the situation, change the number of people that are either suffering or under restrictions because of different reasons. So to me, if you can change something and better it, it's much more exciting.
What about you, Jennifer? How do you decide what to get involved in, and what do you look for?
For me, it's very much how much hands-on I can be, and I'm not as good at raising money as Bob is, and I'm not as comfortable with it. I'm very happy to give, but I'm not. It doesn't come easily to me to ask others to give. So my talent, I believe, is actually being in there in the trenches. I like the things that I feel the most reward from are those where I actually get to know the people that I'm helping. I don't feel as much that I have as much to give at a board level necessarily. Perhaps I have more to give than I recognize, but I know I have a lot to give as a leader and an enthusiast in, like at CV, I am teaching cooking classes, or I have just joined the board of the Coatesville Youth Initiative, and it excites me to see these young people who have so much potential, who without someone like Coatesville Youth Initiative will not have the chance for it to shine. So I like to work at the food line if it's a Thanksgiving feeding people or something, rather than being the one to set it up.
So hands-on relationship right there, seeing how it makes a difference. Can you talk a little bit about, I'll go back to the fundraising thing after a bit, but being so involved in the community, balancing family life, personal energy, work life, professional life, and community involvement, that's a lot on the plate, plus traveling and actually relaxing and keeping in shape. How do you fit it all in? And is it
When
ever
you
too
say
much?
a huge part of our family life is, yeah.
It very much is, and the children are supportive of it now that they're older. This year's Christmas present from our 2 children to me was a donation to the Chester County Food Bank, and a sizable one that they'd never done in the past or whatever, and we sat around the room and the 4 of us just cried. I mean, it was that much of an impact, and it meant so much to me, it meant so much to them, and they knew right now that that is where my heart is. As far as in philanthropy, my heart's with the 2 children and Jennifer, but as far as what I'm doing, what I'm dedicating myself to, and so they're part of it. When I look at work, I feel that my management team, no matter what company I have at that time, I tell them that I want them active in their community, whether the local community or the community where they live. And so everybody that is with us, is in management, is out there doing something for their community.
So the balance is part of who you are too. It's you're integrating
Right.
community service. Again, it's living and breathing. Can you speak a bit more about your children and getting them involved in the community, and how you instill, or how does that happen? How does that work? As parents, how do you try to make sure those values get translated?
Well, I think we've been very blessed to have Clan because it's a family foundation, and Tyler and Caitlin were 6 and 8, or when they were first invited to a meeting, because they're the youngest of the third G3, and so they were, by the time Caitlin was 8 and Tyler was 10, they actually had input on giving to certain projects, and their cousins were wonderful enough to actually listen to them. Well, Caitlin, even at 8, she had a strong voice, so we've been blessed because they've been educated since they were young, not only by us, but by their cousins and their aunts and uncles. So I think that, Tyler at this point is working in New York and needs, he said to me the other day that he needs to have another nonprofit to work for, because it's part of life in New York, that that is helpful for his business too. And
Well, I think Henry Jordan was chairman of the Clan-Hill Foundation when our children were young, and when we would have these get-togethers, he was smart enough to know how to get them involved and how to get them to participate. So they broke off into small groups, and they all had all different age levels and everything else, including, the parents. And they were given X dollars, and they were given real life projects. And the question is, do you want to do this? Well, there was one that was an Arthur Ashe tennis camp, and the kids got into that. Well, turns out there were other things that got the money. There was another one that they wanted money for a rototiller, and that got voted down. And we got home from the meeting, and one child approached us that we should be giving money to the Arthur Ashe, and the other one, we can afford to give them money for the rototiller. So I sit there going, well, that was a great session, but that's just, cost me some money. So,
But an attitude of prosperity rather than scarcity.
but it was a great education, and our executive directors have been good. They get the family involved, they bring them in as readers at a young age, and they read grants broken into one of 4 categories, and they're involved. And so it's very good for them.
so Tyler has read environment grant proposals, and Caitlin education grant proposals.
Good.
So and Clan-Hill is smart enough that they allow these next generations to feel that if it's a bad time in their life for them to read that cycle, then don't read that cycle. Read next cycle. So Tyler's not reading this cycle. Hopefully he'll be reading next cycle. Caitlin is still reading education. It brings new voice to the committees to have these young readers, and we're honestly blessed to have the Foundling Foundation that we do, because I know of no others that welcome the voices of the next generations as ours do. We're actually on to G4s. There are some G4s who are reading. So.
Yeah. Well, it's thoughtful, and it's strategic, and it's inclusive, and it's respectful. The way you give voice to the next generations to bring them on early.
Well, it also gives them ownership that it's their foundation too.
Right. And too many times people wait till way too late, and then the kids don't feel, they question whether it's theirs to deal with, or should they do things as their parents would have wanted. So you are making it theirs from an early age.
We also have the possibility of G3 grants, so that if a G3 member wishes to put in a grant proposal or wishes to invite someone that they will be funded at some level, not necessarily the full level, but that they will be funded. So, incentive.
Yeah, beautiful, great. Can you talk a little, you talked about with the grant making and the proposal reading and the site visits. When you go on site visits, what kinds of things are you looking for? What are you noticing when you're on a site visit, and whether it's a formal or an informal? Sometimes there are official visits that are set up, and probably sometimes you're just kind of hearing what's going on in the community. What do you look for? What resonates?
I think you get a very good reading from the executive director but if they invite more people, I think it's very helpful. Sometimes it's not, but I mean, I think that's telling you something in itself. If they bring in one of the top leaders of the board, and they're not a strong person, or they're not really that familiar with what that organization is really doing, then you go, how can they really be an effective board if they aren't really attuned to what they're doing? Your development person, you know, there's so much rotation in that, you know, there's always someone new coming on. I think the average life expectancy in the job is about 2.5 years, if that. So that's always changing. But, you know, the executive director is the main person, and it's what he or she gives for an image, their knowledge. And to me, so many times we go to a site visit or we hear a presentation, and it is, one, coming from something they wrote, and two, it's coming from a brain and not a heart. And I just, it hurts me to see people talking and you just aren't emotionally moved because they're not saying about whatever the issue might be. They're not touching you, they're not reaching you, they're not pouring out, you know, a reason that you really want to give. They're either giving stats or, you know, telling a story, but people don't really speak from the heart, and if they don't, then they don't impress me as much.
Doesn't reach, doesn't touch.
I can't say exactly what we're looking for when we go on a site visit. I can say that we almost always come away from a presentation or a site visit with the same feeling of either, wow, that was really impressive, or, you know, I hadn't thought of that, or, my gosh, what is that person doing in that position? Unfortunately, our track record in the last year, as far as recognizing when people were in the wrong positions, has been very good.
There's been a lot of turnover there.
Yes.
Yeah. I get a sense of it should be coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or shouldn't have happened.
Or shouldn't. Yeah, how did that happen in the first place?
I would say that we're both pretty blunt with organizations.
Let's speak about that, because you're wonderfully blunt. Would you mind that?
Yeah.
You're not going to do any good.
Right. If you don't say what you really feel could help the organization, you're not going to be doing them any good.
And I think of it as constructive criticism as opposed to being blunt. But no, I'm very open.
I think most of the organizations in Chester County would say we're
They
pretty
call
blunt.
it, yeah, we're blunt. You're doing it for their good. You're not doing it to hear yourself talk. But you're trying to tell them what they really should be doing to make themselves a better organization. And you also say, it doesn't mean we're right, but this is how we feel.
So you put it out there and then see how the organizations react.
Right.
Whether something's done or not done, or whether there's actually other reasons that you weren't aware of, whatever that may be. But
We would be
fabulous.
happy for people to come back and say, this is the reason we're doing this, instead of what you think we maybe should be doing. Unfortunately, very often that doesn't happen, that they don't respond.
I think it's, people just don't know what to say, perhaps. They don't know what to do with that dynamic. But at the same time, I have to admit that it's pretty wonderful that you can say what's on your mind. And I think there's a cadre of folks that you've said what's on your mind, and they get that that's what you do, and they're a lot stronger now, and they appreciate it. And you can keep going back and saying more, and yeah, that's good. But I think the first time somebody hears from you in a blunt manner, they don't know what to do. But then they realize that
They assume they're not going to get a penny, and yet we're still going to support them, but you know,
They don't know what to
you've
do.
got to look at this or
Yeah.
look at that or
Yeah.
change whatever.
I think the most difficult, or one of the most difficult things for us is when we feel that we have to support an organization because the people that they're serving are going to be hurt if we don't, and yet we think that the organization is not working.
It breaks your heart and
Mhm.
makes you angry, and you want
It
to be
does,
able to fix
yes.
it, but you can't do it all yourself, so, yeah,
Mhm.
it is painful. Yeah, and trying to figure out who can help to fix it. Yeah, that's the huge dilemma. You're also notoriously fabulous, at least Bob, at the fundraising side. Your reputation has grown over the years as you've paired up with some Betty and some fabulous folks. And Jennifer, you said that you're not comfortable with the fundraising, yet you seem very comfortable. Want to talk a little bit about that whole dynamic and what makes it work and why do you do it?
Part of it is people don't like to do it. And it is obviously essential for any organization. But to think that you'll ever have a board that'll have 2 or 3 people that will do fundraising, you don't have it. I mean, they throw it in your lap or they throw it in your development director's lap, and many times your executive director, can also, benefit from it and be helpful with it. But people are very uncomfortable with it. I don't mind doing it because of a sales background, and I guess it's also a little bit of the competitive nature I have. So when we do campaigns or whatever, we go out there and we get them done, and we get them done fast. Right now we're doing a fundraising event for a wine tasting for the food bank, and we started it a month ago, and we've raised $220,000 for a wine tasting dinner with Dick Vermeil. And it's a matter of just getting out there, and you do have to push, you do have to follow up. Caller ID makes it a little bit harder now that they see my name, and they seem not to be available at that time. But no, it's really, you get out there and you tell your story. I honestly believe if you're telling a story that you believe in, that your heart's in, and you're doing good, people are willing to donate and support it.
I guess that I'm very happy to lead by example as far as giving, and hope to bring some others along. But I don't ever think that it's my role to make a judgment in how much someone can give, and so I struggle with that, where Bob doesn't seem to struggle with that. And once in a thank you note, said thank you very much for giving what you gave, but we really could use this much more, and he was given that too. So
It all works. Once you've seen one way to try. What works for you,
yeah.
right?
Well, also, having done it long enough, you've got a rapport with the people that can make the substantial gifts. And so that makes it a lot easier for me to go out and, raise the bigger dollars and bigger donations, quickly. So that does help.
But it's difficult for me also in that I feel as much part of the food bank. I want the food bank to get those dollars, and let's face it, there's a pretty limited group in Chester County who really give generously, and so both of us feel that we don't want to be going back again and again and again, asking for this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. So you have to pick and choose. I'm asking for smaller amounts, luckily working for a board that needs, are smaller at this point.
And it takes a lot more time now to cultivate a new donor that doesn't really give in Chester County, even though they might live in it. And there are a couple people that I've been going after that I know are strong in what they do politically, and have now, gone through different channels and said, okay, can you give me a lunch with this person? And so we have two people that I've gotten for the food bank. I've got a meeting next week with another one. So, it's taken time. The one person took me over a year to get a luncheon with. And that was going through a friend of his to try to set it up, and yet I'd met the gentleman. But so the new ones just take that much more work, and you look at an organization and you don't really have people that feel they have the time, and your development person is probably not the right person to be going after a key person. Your executive director is hopefully busy enough that he or she doesn't have the time to do it. So you've got to come up with a board member that's willing to, stick with it for a good amount of time.
I think that's a huge lesson learned to really make sure people understand, because so many times they think it's a real quick one lunch and done. And you're right, maybe we've, in a sense, the people who are the low-hanging fruit, who have it in them naturally to sort of give, they're doing it. So you're really going through that next level of folks who are getting more used to the fact that there's causes in their community that they could care more about, and they have the means. It's just they hadn't really thought about it too much.
Well, you don't have a choice anymore. The wealth of Chester County is spreading out. And if you look at some of the families or whatever, we have one child living in Colorado and one child living in New York. Well, they're going to be up there supporting their organizations, and all of a sudden it's not Chester County. And so it's a process that has to bring the new people that are moving out here into more of a philanthropic attitude, and it's a challenge.
And it's long-term relationship building. Long-term, very long-term.
It is for us, because we would rather stay home at night than
Yeah.
go out to a social.
And that, that is the part where you say the balance, that we tend to try not to go to the evening events as much as possible. Because it literally, we could be doing that every night of the week.
Two or three or four of
yeah.
the night sometimes.
So
Yeah.
you just, in trying to maintain sanity, we're more willing to do all of the other parts and attempt to save ourselves.
Right. You need that quiet time
Mhm.
together. Yeah, yeah. And then the focuses of meetings and the lunches and the follow-up.
Mhm.
Yeah. But those social events are important to at least get some people introduced originally, and then you can follow up with the connectors. Oh. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and you get drawn. I mean, you don't want to go to one because you don't want the other person to say, why aren't you going to ours? And everybody has them. And when we started the food bank, we said, we're not going to have events. And our overhead 4.5 years ago was $62,000. Well, we're at $1.8 million now, and we're going, okay, I think we're going to have to do an event, because your annual drive's not going to generate that. And so you end up doing more than you'd sometimes like to be doing.
It goes to the question about how to draw in more people to be involved in the charitable
Mhm.
community, and I guess events have their place. It's a way to get new people together, to start to introduce them to what's going on and the people who are involved. So maybe events with a focus are, that actually would be a good question to turn it around to you, is what tips that you would have for the nonprofit charitable community to get other people, newer people involved in their causes, especially in this electronic age?
Well, there's three different levels. Right now, you can successfully email solicitations. And if you put something in the beginning that you respect their time and did not want to interrupt their day with a call, but you wanted to introduce a opportunity to do a sponsorship, etc., and that you'll then follow up with a call, you cut 2 calls down to 1 call, and they're not offended by it. I think the United Way has done an excellent program trying to get young management people involved in organizations. So, we started the Octorara Food Cupboard, and we have 3 graduates of the United Way program that are on their board there. And, definitely they're doing well. The success is good. They're organized. Larry Welsh and I stayed on their board for a year until we felt that, they knew what they were doing, they were comfortable and everything else. The other thing is you just have to luck into it. You hear about somebody that is going to start to slow down, and you go after them. If somebody announces they're thinking about a retirement, you see if there's a fit to your organization or anything like that, and do it. We picked up a board member at the food bank, and we timed it perfect. The gentleman was just beginning to slow down and look for opportunities, and we were the second one to the door, and he said, well, I'm only going to do 2 or 3 organizations. And the gentleman is putting in a lot of time and quality effort and quality work, and also financially supporting us.
But was your question to events?
Just overall, how to involve more people who may be new to philanthropy and charities, to start to bring them in. Events, what do you see? Electronics, it's such an electronic age. How does anybody involve more folks in the community with charity?
I have a little bit of trouble with events. I mean, if I'm giving to a golf outing, I don't feel like my $1,000 donation is doing $1,000 worth of work.
If they hold a dinner.
So, to me, I have a problem sometimes with events, that I don't really feel that, my money is going to help that particular organization as much as just giving to them without the event.
So a text to give or text to visit is a more efficient way for you.
Well, I was texting for an event, so, I'm getting caught in the same thing. I mean, we had to do the event. If you look at someone like CVIM, they're bringing in $400,000 on a golf outing, and it's fantastic. I mean, they are the #1 event in Chester County, but they continue to build it up. They've got a board that's active. They've got a board, a committee that runs that and does it very, very efficiently.
And they also use it to recognize volunteers and to help thank people, and there's publicity with it, so they're using it as a volunteer and networking. So, yeah, I guess it's multiple goals.
I mean, to some extent, we're the wrong people to ask as far as how to bring others in. And we are a subset that are very different from many. I mean, I don't want to go to a volunteer luncheon. I'd rather use the hours that I have to volunteer. But there are many people who volunteer who really, that's a highlight to them. So I don't know that we can speak to that as well as some others might be able to.
Okay, we'll keep asking the question to folks and see what we get. As let's sort of one of the last questions is inspirations. As you look back, and are there people that you, even if you don't want to name them, or if you do, who inspired you to sort of do what you're doing, or who helped you learn a different, more about doing this? Who are your inspirations as you think back to the different people you've known throughout your life who are influencing how you live your life now?
Mine were my parents.
Mine would definitely be my parents, but I think working usually with a co-chairman on a event, you really get to know the person. And you've got to mesh, you've got to work together. And I've had just very good experiences. And because if that person's going to take over a co-chair of a capital campaign or something like that, they're pretty well dedicated to the organization, involved in the organization, and willing to commit the time and the effort. And I've just had fun times. Whether Jim McNeil, he and I did the Boy Scouts, and Bob Spatola and I did the Handi-Crafters one. And, working with someone else is enjoyable. It's fun. They keep you going. They keep your humor up. You also have funny experiences as you go through your different solicitations, and sometimes embarrassing, but usually humorous.
All right, you got to talk about that. Can you give an example without naming names?
The name won't matter because I've told the story before. We were going down to see John Ware for a contribution for Handi-Crafters, and Bob Spatola had not done fundraising before, so he was telling me to do the lead-in and everything, and we drove down to John's house and got there, and John announced that he was hungry, and could we go to lunch? So I drove back up to the restaurant with John, and Bob followed in his car. While we're driving, I'm talking about our project and what we're doing, and all of a sudden realized there was a definite connection here. And while we were going to ask for $25,000, I'd already upped it to $100,000. So we get to lunch and we're talking about it, and I didn't have a chance to tell Bob that I was going to change the ask. And we got to dessert, and I finally said, John, John, we'd like to ask you for $100,000. Well, Bob was drinking a glass of water at the time and just sprayed the whole table because he couldn't believe that the 25 had grown that quickly. But I mean, Jim McNeil and I, we had some incredible going to Penny Wilson for the Boy Scouts, not knowing that she had 4 daughters. And we're talking about the Boy Scouts, and Jim goes, well, you've got to worry about what your daughters, who they're dating. And if she's dating a guy that's been in the Boy Scouts, and I would go, oh, Jim, that was great. So you have to have fun, or it really will drive you crazy. So we had good experiences, funny experiences, rewarding experiences, and you learn that the people that you're asking don't mind. And we approached, one of our board members approached somebody and got a contribution for $15,000. Well, we had a $25,000 and up match program. So I called the lady up and said, I don't know whether this was explained to you. We greatly appreciate your $15,000 donation, but if you could make it 25,000, that money would be doubled. And I said, in no way do I want to insult you. And she goes, oh, Bob, I would hate to have your job. And she said, but she said, it's a good point, I'll go 25. So you had to give it a go or whatever. And so, you know, it worked out. But you look at her response was, yes, I'll do it. And boy, I wouldn't want to have your job. So, you know, people aren't offended when you ask. I mean, you've got to do some homework. You've got to know what range is appropriate. But we had one gentleman that we asked money for, and he said, well, I'm very complimented with the amount you're asking for, but I really don't do all that well. You know, so, you know, we weren't that far off. But, I mean, the people aren't offended. And you have to realize that when you go in, that you're not really going to offend somebody's feelings.
The people who mentored you, or who you felt were that you might have become who you were because of them.
You want to hear
Was
more
the
about the
question.
mentors? All right, so we got partners, we got co-chairs as partners.
I don't know who would have mentored me.
Inspirations,
Yeah.
mentors, yeah.
Yeah. No, my father did a lot of fundraising, and while I wasn't totally aware of the dollar amounts and the different things or whatever, you know, I did certainly know of the admiration and the appreciation that he got for the different fundraising that he did for the organizations they were involved in.
As long as we interviewed Betty and you together, can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to work on charitable causes with Betty Moran?
Betty is very interested in certain organizations, and they move on as she moves on. She very much enjoys doing the campaigns. She gets to the point that if she knows you well enough, that you end up in arbitration. And I've been on the other side where she was asking me for money, and you'd be going, well, I think we could do that over a 5-year period. And she'd go, you can't do it over a 5-year period because I'm not waiting 5 years to come back here to ask you for more money. And you're going, 3, no, 4, no, you know, and you get into the negotiations. But she doesn't mind doing it. She understands the importance of it. She's a go-getter, and she's very, very good at it. And because she's been nice to your organization, she sometimes will remind you that you might want to support this one because she was so nice to your organization. So she's probably one of the most unique in that way. But I gave her a wood carving of a dog in a begging position, and all the kids were upset with me because I gave it to her in late November, and they said at Christmas time she kept showing everybody the begging dog as opposed to what they'd given her.
Oh, no.
So she
Meanwhile, she went out and had 8 more made within.
Did she put it on her business card too?
Yes,
Got the begging dog
she's got the
business
begging dog on her business card. So no, she's
unique.
She's unique in
generous.
how she does it. She's unique in her presentation, and she is very effective.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'm going to ask you about another Jordan Award winner, so we can use what you say about them in some of their clips. How about Al Eastburn won the Jordan Award this year? What would you say about what you've seen working with Al Eastburn? How would you describe him?
I think that he inspires people who work with him of all ages, because he puts so much of himself into whatever he does. It's not as though he delegates. He's right there with you, and inspires you to be the best person that you can be.
And Al has done this a long, long time, from business, being involved with community, and now in his retirement, continuing. Yeah.
Well, I think with Al, at the Jordan Award, I described him as a gentle giant. And he had that way of getting you involved, getting you to participate. His enthusiasm for the projects or whatever was sort of contagious. I mean, I moved out here in '81, and before the year was out, I was on the Coatesville area Partners for Progress with him. And he was the board member that would take you under his wing and explain the different projects, explain the mission, where the vision wants to go, where, you might best fit in. And, you always need the fatherly image in the board that will take in the younger person and be the guiding inspiration. And, that was Al.
His sense of humor goes a long way, too.
Yeah, it does. Quick, it's very quick. Okay. What about for Eva's profile? Eva Verplank turns 90 this summer. What have you got to say about Eva's community involvement and just Eva's as a person?
Well, I first got to know Eva while on the board of the visiting nurses, and found her to be bright, empathetic, efficient, and someone who really, really cares.
When was that? When you first met her?
I would say it was by the mid-1980s, because Tyler and Caitlin would often come to board meetings with me as very small children. So she also was patient.
Anything else you'd like to add about what you see? I mean, that was the 1980s, so it's 40, 50 years later, 40 years later.
I think she's a strength in the community, that she's very willing to verbalize her beliefs, but she brings people along with her.
Great. Sir?
Unfortunately, I've never been on a board or a committee with her, which is amazing. As active and as involved as she is, I'm just shocked that our paths haven't overlapped, because you look at the different boards, the different organizations, and I mean, she's been about as active as anybody can be, but we've never overlapped. I mean, when you're at an event that she's at, it's, she's aware of it, she's completely knowledgeable about it and everything else. But I mean, our paths really didn't overlap, which was shocking.
It's a big county. And as much as she hates special events, that woman can work an event like I've never seen anybody do it. And you're right, she knows who's doing what and what's going on, and she wants to catch up and figure out more. So she works them like crazy. Yes, she hates them, she says. So you're not alone in not being a big fan of events. Interesting. Any words of wisdom that you can offer to future generations of emerging philanthropists? How to get involved, what to look for, your hopes and wishes for them?
I think you look for something that really has your interest. And while I've been on the different boards or whatever, different ones attracted me at different times in my life for different reasons. I I think when you find something that really is your area of interest, you're going to be much more active, you're going to be a stronger player, you'll get more reward out of it. So I think you go where your heart wants you to go.
And when your heart wants you to go too.
Yeah.
You had your sort of 4-year involvement. If I can't make a difference after that, it's okay to find other things too.
And they come. I mean, they're out there. I mean, we live in a county that needs help. And granted, we're wealthy, but, you know, there are just too many other people in our county that need help. Whether it's, you know, a roof over their head or a plate of food in front of them or an education that'll get them out of poverty. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done out there. There are always opportunities. There's no reason that anybody that wants to try to help to make Chester County better can't do it.
What do you think,
Well,
Jennifer?
my thought is that sort of the Nike "just do it," because I think many people in Chester County go through life and they do their daily things and they think they're very satisfied with life. But if they got out and looked beyond their front door and helped someone else, they would realize how much it helped them as a person. So I'm not even looking to the ones who are philanthropically inclined. I'm looking for the people who don't know they are and have so much to give.
Just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Just do it.
Well, there was also that story, supposedly it's true, about the gentleman whose brother had passed away, and he opened up the paper and wanted to see his brother's obituary. And he started reading the obituary, and it was his. And it talked about his wife by name, his 2 children by name, where his job was, how he'd built his business up. It mentioned the 2 country clubs that he belonged to, and it ended. And he all of a sudden realized, I've done nothing to give back. And he said, I would hate to die and have this really be my obituary.
Add to it while you can.
So,
Yeah.
and apparently the gentleman then went out and changed his lifestyle and became, very community oriented.
Was his name Ebenezer Scrooge? I've never heard that one, but yeah, if you had to really take a look at how other people see you and what they say about you. Now's the
Or
chance.
what you think of yourself.
Right,
What you
right,
think
the
of yourself
reflection.
is
Right,
more
right.
important.
Yeah. Is there anything